The cap and gown felt heavier than it should have as I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, cameras flashing from every direction except where my family sat. I had imagined this moment countless times throughout my 4 years at Northwestern. Valedictorian, summa cum laude, accepted to 3 top-tier law schools with full scholarships. I had imagined my mother's proud smile, my father's firm handshake, maybe even my older brother Marcus putting aside his perpetual indifference for just one moment to acknowledge what I'd accomplished. Instead, I got polite applause and my mother's attention fixed firmly on her phone, probably coordinating Marcus's latest business venture or checking the stock prices of his tech startup that had been about to go public for the past 2 years. The graduation ceremony itself was a blur of speeches about bright futures and changing the world. Dean Morrison called my name with particular emphasis when announcing the valedictorian, Sarah Chen, graduating with a 4.0 GPA in International Relations and Economics, recipient of the Fulbright Scholarship, heading to Harvard Law in the fall. The words should have felt like triumph. Instead, they felt hollow, echoing in the auditorium where my parents sat in the 3rd row. My father checking his watch and my mother whispering something to Marcus's girlfriend, Ashley, who had somehow secured a seat in the family section despite only dating my brother for 6 months. After the ceremony, families clustered on the lawn outside, taking pictures and celebrating. I watched other graduates being lifted into bear hugs, receiving flowers, posing for what seemed like hundreds of photos. My family found me near the fountain, and the congratulations were as lukewarm as I'd expected. "Congratulations, honey," my mother said, offering a brief hug that felt more like a professional greeting. "Your father and I are very proud." The words came out practiced, like she'd rehearsed them on the drive over. She was already looking past me, scanning the crowd. "Marcus, didn't you say you knew someone in Sarah's class? Maybe we should introduce—" "Mom, I'm Sarah," I said quietly. "Of course you are, sweetheart. I meant one of your classmates." She smiled, that politician's smile she'd perfected during her years on various charity boards. "We should get going soon. Marcus has that investor meeting at 6, and the traffic back to the city will be terrible." My father stepped forward with an envelope. "We're very proud of what you've accomplished, Sarah. This should help with your transition to Harvard." He pressed the envelope into my hands with the same efficiency he brought to his business deals. "Law school is expensive, even with scholarships." I looked down at the envelope, thick and cream-colored with my name written in my mother's careful script. For a moment, I felt a flutter of something. Maybe they had written me a letter. Maybe there were words inside that they couldn't say out loud. Maybe this envelope contained the recognition I'd been craving for 22 years. "Thank you," I said, slipping it into my purse without opening it. Something told me not to look inside. "Not here. Not now. We really should head back," my mother said, already walking toward the parking lot. "Marcus, Ashley, are you riding with us or taking your car?" And just like that, the conversation shifted away from me and toward the logistics of Marcus's investor meeting. I stood there in my cap and gown, diploma in one hand, their envelope in my purse, watching my family organize themselves around my brother's schedule as if I had already disappeared. The graduation party was being held at the Fairmont Hotel downtown, a joint celebration for the top graduates in several departments. My parents had been invited, of course. It was the kind of high-profile university event that looked good on their social calendars. I assumed we would all go together, but as we reached the parking lot, my mother turned to me with that same practiced smile. "Darling, you don't mind taking your own car to the party, do you? Marcus needs to make some calls on the way, and you know how he concentrates better with fewer distractions." Fewer distractions. That's what I was. "Sure," I heard myself saying. "I'll meet you there." I watched their BMW pull away, Marcus in the passenger seat already on his phone, Ashley leaning forward from the back seat to contribute to whatever important conversation was happening. My parents in the front, my mother gesturing animatedly as she spoke, a complete family unit that somehow didn't require me to function. I sat in my car for 10 minutes before starting the engine, still wearing my cap and gown, trying to process what had just happened. This was supposed to be my day. I had worked 4 years for this moment, had sacrificed social events and sleep and any semblance of a normal college experience to graduate at the top of my class. I had done everything right, everything they said they wanted me to do, and still, I was an afterthought. The drive to the Fairmont gave me time to think, and by the time I pulled into the hotel parking garage, I had made a decision. I was going to enjoy this party. I was going to celebrate my accomplishments with my classmates and professors who actually knew what I had achieved. I was going to stop waiting for my parents to notice me and start living for myself. The ballroom was elegant, decorated in the university colors with round tables set for 8. There was a cocktail hour first, where graduates mingled with faculty and family members. I found my classmates from the International Relations program clustered around one of the high-top tables, still in their caps and gowns, laughing about something Professor Williams had said during his speech. Sarah Jessica Martinez, who had been my study partner for international law, waved me over. "Can you believe we actually did it? 4 years of torture and we're finally free." "Free and employed," added David Kim, who was starting at the State Department in the fall. "Well, most of us. Sarah's going to be buried in law books for another 3 years." "Harvard law books," corrected Professor Williams, appearing beside our group with a glass of wine. "Sarah, I hope you know how proud we all are. Your thesis on international humanitarian law was exceptional. I've already had colleagues at Harvard asking about you. For the first time all day, I felt genuinely happy. These people knew my work, knew what I had accomplished, understood the significance of what I was about to undertake. This was what recognition felt like. Thank you, Professor Williams. That means everything coming from you. Your parents must be over the moon," he continued. "Where are they? I'd love to meet them." I glanced around the room and spotted my family at a table near the front. My parents deep in conversation with another couple while Marcus showed Ashley something on his phone. They hadn't looked in my direction once since I'd arrived. "They're over there," I said, nodding toward their table. "The couple in the front section." Professor Williams followed my gaze. "Should we go say hello?" "Maybe later," I said quickly. "They're talking business." He gave me a look that suggested he understood more than I'd said, but nodded and excused himself to greet other families. My classmates continued chatting about their post-graduation plans, and I tried to stay engaged, but I found myself glancing repeatedly at my family's table. They were seated with the Hendersons, major university donors whose daughter had graduated from the business school. My mother was in full charm mode, leaning forward attentively as Mrs. Henderson spoke, my father nodding at whatever Mr. Henderson was saying about market conditions. When dinner was announced, I expected to sit with my family, but as I approached their table, my mother looked up with surprise. "Oh, Sarah, we saved you a seat," she said, but I could see there were already 8 people at the table and no extra chairs. "Actually, it looks like we're full here. Why don't you sit with your classmates? I'm sure you'd rather be with people your own age anyway." The dismissal was so casual, so matter-of-fact, that it took me a moment to process what had happened. I had been uninvited from my own family's table at my own graduation party. "Of course," I managed. "I'll find somewhere else." I turned away before anyone could see the tears threatening to spill over and made my way to a table in the back where some of my classmates had gathered. They welcomed me enthusiastically, pulling out a chair and immediately including me in their conversation about summer plans and new cities and fresh starts. But I couldn't focus on their words. All I could think about was the empty feeling in my chest, the realization that I had spent 22 years trying to earn something that was never going to be given to me. Throughout dinner, I watched my parents laugh and engage with the Hendersons, watched Marcus charm Mrs. Henderson's daughter, who was apparently doing something impressive in consulting, watched Ashley fit seamlessly into the conversation as if she'd been part of the family for years instead of months. They looked complete without me. They looked happy. The speeches began after the main course. Dean Morrison spoke about the graduating class, highlighting several students' achievements. When he mentioned my name and asked me to stand for recognition as valedictorian, I rose from my chair at the back table, smiled and waved briefly, then sat back down to generous applause from my classmates and scattered applause from the rest of the room. I looked toward my family's table and saw my parents clapping politely, but their attention had already shifted back to their dinner companions. After dinner, there was more mingling and coffee service. I made the rounds, thanking professors, exchanging contact information with classmates, accepting congratulations from people I barely knew. It should have felt wonderful. It was wonderful in many ways. These were the people who had been my community for 4 years, who had pushed me to be better, who had celebrated my successes along the way. But I couldn't shake the image of that empty chair that had never existed at my family's table. Around 10 o'clock, my parents appeared beside me as I was saying goodbye to Jessica and David. "We're heading out, honey," my mother said. "Early flight tomorrow. We're going to Marcus's conference in Denver. You don't mind, do you? It's such a good networking opportunity for him." "Of course not," I said automatically. "Congratulations again," my father added, shaking my hand like I was a business associate. "We're very proud." They were gone before I could respond, Marcus and Ashley trailing behind them, Ashley calling over her shoulder that it was lovely to meet me and she hoped we'd see each other again soon. I watched them leave through the hotel lobby, my mother's arm linked through Marcus's, the 4 of them looking like the family they apparently were when I wasn't around to complicate things. I stayed at the party until almost midnight, long after most of the families had left, talking with the handful of graduates who were lingering over the last of the wine and coffee. We shared stories about professors and classes, laughed about the stress of senior year, made promises to stay in touch that we probably wouldn't keep. It was exactly the kind of evening I should have been having with my family, reflective, celebratory, focused on the future. Finally, I was alone in the hotel lobby, still wearing my cap and gown, car keys in one hand and my purse in the other. I could feel the envelope my father had given me, thick and substantial against my side. For the first time since he'd handed it to me, I was curious about what was inside. I found a quiet corner near the lobby bar and pulled out the envelope. My name was written on the front in my mother's perfect penmanship, Sarah Elizabeth Chen, like an invitation to something important. I slid my finger under the flap and opened it carefully. Inside was a check for $25,000, made out to me, signed by both my parents. The memo line read, "Congratulations on your graduation. For Harvard expenses, $25,000. It was generous, more than generous. It would cover my first year's living expenses with money left over. It was exactly the kind of practical, thoughtful gift I should have expected from my parents, who had always provided for me financially, without question. But there was no note, no letter, no words of pride or love or encouragement, just a check. Substantial and impersonal, like payment for services rendered. I stared at the numbers for a long time, sitting in that hotel lobby at midnight on what should have been one of the best days of my life. $25,000 to acknowledge 4 years of perfect grades, leadership positions, scholarship awards, and acceptance to one of the best law schools in the country. $25,000 to represent their feelings about my accomplishments. I thought about the way my mother had looked past me during the ceremony, the way she'd uninvited me from their dinner table, the way they'd left the party without a backward glance. I thought about Marcus's investor meeting and Ashley's place in the car and the conference in Denver that was more important than spending one night celebrating their daughter's graduation. I thought about Harvard Law School, starting in 3 months, and how excited I'd been to tell them about my acceptance, and how they'd received the news with the same polite enthusiasm they might show for a neighbor's promotion. I thought about 22 years of trying to be perfect, trying to be worthy of their attention, trying to earn the kind of unconditional love and pride I saw other parents give their children without question. And I realized I was done. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. It was past midnight now, but I could still make the deposit. I took a photo of the check, front and back, and watched as $25,000 appeared in my account balance. Then I walked out of the hotel, got in my car, and drove home to my apartment for what I had just decided would be the last time. My apartment near campus was a studio I'd rented junior year when I finally moved out of the dorms. It was small but perfectly organized, desk facing the window, books arranged by subject, a bulletin board covered with academic achievements and acceptance letters. Everything in its place, just like I'd been trained to keep my life. Controlled, acceptable, invisible when necessary. I sat on my bed, still wearing my cap and gown at 2 a.m, laptop open, staring at flight booking websites. The $25,000 sat in my account like a challenge, like a dare I wasn't sure I had the courage to take. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Hope you're celebrating somewhere fabulous. You deserve it." I almost laughed. Celebrating. Right. Instead of responding, I opened a new browser window and searched for flights leaving Chicago in the next 24 hours. I had no destination in mind, which felt both terrifying and liberating. For 22 years, I'd followed a carefully mapped path. Good grades, better grades, perfect grades, leadership positions, internships, law school, every step planned and approved and designed to make my parents proud. But sitting there in my graduation gown, I realized I had no idea what I actually wanted to do with my life. Law school had been their suggestion. "You're so good at arguing, Sarah, and it's such a stable career." I'd applied because it seemed like the next logical step, because it was impressive, because it was what successful people did. But what did I want? The question felt foreign, like trying to speak a language I'd never learned. I scrolled through destinations: New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Seattle. All cities where I could theoretically start over, where nobody knew me as the Chen family's invisible daughter or the valedictorian who sat alone at her own graduation party. My laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from Professor Williams, sent just an hour ago. "Sarah, I wanted to follow up on our conversation this evening about your thesis. I've been thinking about our discussion of humanitarian law in conflict zones. And there's an opportunity I'd like to discuss with you. The International Rescue Committee has reached out to several universities looking for recent graduates interested in field work. It's a 2-year commitment, and the locations are challenging. Currently, they're looking at placements in Jordan, Lebanon, and Greece, working with refugee populations. I know you're committed to Harvard, but I wanted to pass along the information in case you might consider deferring for a year or two. The work would be directly related to your research, and frankly, the field experience would make you a stronger candidate for international law positions after graduation. Let me know if you'd like to discuss further. Again, congratulations on an exceptional 4 years. You should be very proud of what you've accomplished." I read the email 3 times. Fieldwork, refugee populations, Jordan, Lebanon, Greece, defer Harvard. The idea should have terrified me. It was completely off script, nothing like the carefully planned path I'd been following. It was uncertain and difficult and far from everything familiar. It was perfect. I spent the next 3 hours researching the International Rescue Committee, reading about their programs, looking at photos of refugee camps and resettlement programs, and young aid workers who looked tired but purposeful in ways I'd never felt. By 5 a.m, I had filled out the preliminary application and written a cover letter explaining my background and interest in the position. By 6 a.m, I had submitted it. By 7 a.m, I was packing. I moved through my apartment methodically, sorting through 4 years of college life. Most of it would go into storage or be donated. Textbooks, furniture, the carefully curated wardrobe of blazers and professional dresses I'd assembled for internships and interviews. I kept only what would fit in 2 suitcases, clothes for different climates, my laptop, a few books, and the folder containing all my academic credentials. At the bottom of my jewelry box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a necklace my grandmother had given me before she died. A small jade pendant on a thin gold chain. She'd been my father's mother, a woman who'd immigrated from Taiwan with nothing and built a successful restaurant business through sheer determination. I barely remembered her, but I remembered her stories about leaving everything behind to create something new. I put the necklace on and felt like I was carrying her courage with me. My phone had been buzzing intermittently with congratulations texts from classmates and extended family members who'd seen photos from graduation on social media. My parents had posted exactly one photo, a family shot taken before the ceremony, all 5 of us standing in front of the university sign. In the picture, I'm smiling between my parents, while Marcus and Ashley stand slightly apart, looking like the attractive young couple they were. The caption read, "Proud of our graduate, on to Harvard Law School." The comments were full of congratulations and heart emojis from my parents' friends and colleagues. I scrolled through them, looking for any mention of my actual achievements. Valedictorian, summa cum laude, Fulbright scholarship. Nothing. Just proud of our graduate, as if I were interchangeable with any other graduate from any other school. I screenshotted the post and saved it to my phone, though I wasn't sure why. By noon, I had loaded my car with everything I was keeping and arranged for a donation pickup for the rest. My lease didn't end until August, so I left my key with the building manager and paid the final month's rent. I'd lose the security deposit, but I had $25,000 now, and suddenly that felt like the best money I'd ever spent. I drove to my parents' house in Vinetka, a sprawling colonial in a neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly manicured and every family looked successful from the outside. I'd grown up in this house, had studied at the kitchen table and practiced piano in the living room, and spent countless hours in my bedroom trying to be the daughter they wanted me to be. The house was empty when I arrived. They were already on their way to Denver for Marcus's conference. I let myself in with the key I'd had since high school and went straight to my father's study. He kept a box of personalized stationery in his desk drawer, thick cream paper with his name embossed at the top. I took a single sheet and sat at his desk to write. "Mum and Dad, thank you for the graduation gift. I've decided to defer Harvard for a year and apply for a position with the International Rescue Committee working with refugee populations overseas. I know this isn't the path you planned for me, but it's the path I'm choosing for myself. I'll be in touch when I'm settled somewhere. Sarah." I left the note on his desk, next to the family photo, where we all looked happy and connected, and like the kind of family that celebrated each other's achievements. Then, I walked through the house one more time, looking at the photographs lining the hallway walls. Marcus's high school football photos, his college graduation, the newspaper clipping from when his startup had been featured in a tech magazine. My academic awards were there too, but smaller, tucked between larger photos of family vacations and holidays. Even on the wall, I was an afterthought. I took my high school graduation photo, the one where I'm holding my valedictorian medal, and slipped it into my purse. If I was going to disappear from this family, I wanted to take something that proved I had existed. My phone rang as I was walking to my car. The caller ID showed my mother's number, and for a moment, my heart jumped. Maybe they'd seen my note already. Maybe they were calling to, "Sarah, honey, I'm so glad I caught you. I just remembered, Marcus's friend David graduated from Northwestern's business school this year, and I thought maybe you two should connect before you start at Harvard. You're both going to be in Boston, and he's starting at a consulting firm there. Should I give him your number?" I stood in the driveway of my childhood home, car packed with everything I owned, having just left a note explaining that I was leaving the country indefinitely, and my mother was trying to set me up with my brother's friend. "Mom," I said carefully, "did you go home today?" "Home? No, we're at O'Hare waiting for our flight." "Why? Did Dad check his desk?" "Honey, what are you talking about? We're about to board. Should I give David your number or not?" I could hear the impatience in her voice, the subtle irritation that suggested I was being difficult by not immediately agreeing to her plan. In the background, I could hear Marcus talking to someone, probably Ashley, and the general noise of the airport. "No," I said, "don't give him my number. Sarah, I really think you should consider—" "Mom, I have to go. Have a good trip." I hung up and got in my car. I drove east without a specific destination, just away from Chicago and away from everything familiar. I stopped for gas in Indiana and checked my email. There was already a response from the International Rescue Committee, an automated reply acknowledging my application and explaining that they would be in touch within the week for an initial phone screening. 1 week. I could be deployed somewhere in the world within months, working in refugee camps, doing something that actually mattered, instead of sitting in law school classrooms learning how to argue about theoretical scenarios. I thought about calling my parents, explaining my decision properly, maybe even driving back to have a real conversation about what I wanted versus what they expected. But I remembered sitting alone at that graduation party, remembered being uninvited from their dinner table, remembered 22 years of being the good daughter who did everything right, and still somehow wasn't quite right enough. Instead, I kept driving. I stopped for the night in Cleveland, checking into a budget hotel near the airport. I'd never been to Cleveland before, had no reason to be there except that it was 6 hours away from Chicago and nobody knew where I was. The freedom of that felt intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. I ordered room service and sat on the hotel bed with my laptop, researching the places where the IRC was currently operating. Jordan had the largest refugee population, over 650,000 Syrian refugees in a country of 10 million people. Greece was struggling with overcrowded camps on the islands, desperate people fleeing conflicts I'd only read about in academic papers. Lebanon was hosting more refugees per capita than any other country in the world. These were real problems affecting real people, not theoretical case studies or exam questions. I could be helping with resettlement programs, legal aid, education initiatives. I could be doing work that mattered, work that helped people, instead of just impressing admissions committees and potential employers. My phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. "Saw your parents' graduation post. So cute. Are you celebrating with family tonight?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding something like that. It wasn't exactly a lie. I was celebrating in my own way. I was celebrating the first decision I'd made purely for myself in 22 years. I was celebrating the fact that I'd finally stopped waiting for my parents to notice me and started noticing myself. I was celebrating the fact that I'd finally cashed the check and left. I fell asleep that night in a hotel room in Cleveland, 6 hours away from everything I'd ever known, with applications pending for jobs in countries I'd never visited, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Boston, waiting for a video call that would determine the next 2 years of my life. I'd spent the intervening weeks in a strange limbo, staying in budget hotels, subletting a room from a Harvard graduate student for the summer, avoiding my parents' increasingly confused phone calls. The IRC had moved quickly. After the initial phone screening, they'd requested my transcripts, writing samples, and 3 references. Professor Williams had been enthusiastic in his recommendation. My other 2 references, my constitutional law professor and my internship supervisor at the ACLU, had both expressed surprise at my career pivot, but wrote strong letters supporting my application. "Sarah Chen," the voice called through my laptop speakers. On screen, I could see Maria Santos, the IRC's regional director for Europe and the Middle East, calling from their New York headquarters. "Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today." "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied, adjusting my laptop screen and hoping the coffee shop's Wi-Fi would hold up for the duration of the call. "I have to say, your application caught our attention immediately. Valedictorian at Northwestern, Fulbright scholar, accepted to Harvard Law. Those are impressive credentials." But what interests me more is this letter you included explaining why you want to defer law school to work in refugee services. Can you tell me more about that decision? I had rehearsed this answer, but sitting there in that coffee shop, the prepared response felt inadequate. How could I explain that I'd spent my entire life trying to be perfect for people who barely noticed me, and that helping strangers felt more meaningful than impressing my parents? I've spent 4 years studying international humanitarian law from an academic perspective, I said finally, but I realized I don't want to just understand these issues theoretically. I want to be part of the solution on the ground, working directly with the people affected by these policies. That's admirable, but I have to ask, this is a significant departure from your planned career path. Law school at Harvard is an incredible opportunity. Are you sure you want to defer that? I thought about my parents, probably just now getting home from Denver, probably just now seeing my note on my father's desk. I thought about the Harvard orientation materials that had been arriving at my old apartment, the housing applications I hadn't filled out, the student loans I hadn't finalized. I've never been more sure of anything, I said. Maria smiled. Good, because I'm going to be frank with you. This work is hard. The conditions are challenging, the hours are long, and the pay is minimal. You'll be working in refugee camps that are overcrowded and under-resourced. You'll see things that will stay with you forever. And at the end of 2 years, you'll have to decide whether to continue this path or return to your original plan. I understand. We currently have openings in 3 locations. Our Jordan program is working with Syrian refugees in the Zaatari camp. It's our largest operation in the region, but also our most established. The Greece program is more fluid, working with new arrivals on the islands and also with the resettlement process for those granted asylum. The Lebanon program is the most challenging. We're working in informal settlements and urban refugee populations with very limited resources. I had researched all 3 locations extensively, but hearing Maria describe them made them feel suddenly real and immediate. Which program would you be most interested in? She asked. Greece, I said without hesitation. I studied modern Greek in college, and I wrote my thesis on EU asylum policy. I think I could be most useful there. Greece it is then. I should warn you, the situation there is particularly volatile right now. The camps on the islands are severely overcrowded, and there's been increasing tension with local populations. It's not an easy assignment for someone's first field placement. I'm ready for difficult. After the call ended, I sat in that coffee shop for another hour, processing what had just happened. I had a job. I had a purpose. In 6 weeks, I would be flying to Athens to begin a 2-year assignment working with refugees on the Greek islands. I'd also missed 17 calls from my mother. I finally called her back from my sublet that evening, steeling myself for a conversation I'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. Sarah Elizabeth Chen, where have you been? The anger in her voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. We came home to find your note, and then you disappeared. We've been calling for weeks. I've been in Boston, getting ready for my new job. What new job? You're supposed to start Harvard in August. I explained about the IRC, about the position in Greece, about deferring law school. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. This is ridiculous, Sarah. You can't just throw away Harvard Law School to go play humanitarian in some refugee camp. What will people think? There it was. Not, are you sure this is what you want, or will you be safe? But what will people think? I don't care what people think, Mom. Well, you should. You've worked too hard to get where you are to throw it all away on some idealistic adventure. This is exactly the kind of impulsive decision that... Impulsive? I interrupted. I've been thinking about this for months. I've researched the organization, the program, the region. I've spoken with professors and professionals in the field. This isn't impulsive. It's the first truly considered decision I've ever made. Sarah, be reasonable. You can do volunteer work during law school breaks if you want to help people, but this, leaving the country, deferring Harvard, this isn't practical. Practical. Everything in my life had been practical. Practical major, practical extracurriculars, practical career path. When had I ever been allowed to do something because it felt right instead of because it looked good on paper? I'm 22 years old, Mom. I'm allowed to make my own decisions. Not with our money, you're not. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift inside me, some final cable snapping. You're right, I said quietly. It's not your decision to make with your money. I'll be supporting myself from now on. Sarah, that's not what I meant. Yes, it is. And it's fine. I understand. You gave me money for Harvard Law School, and I'm not going to Harvard Law School, so you want the money back. We don't want the money back, honey. We want you to make smart choices. This is a smart choice. It's just not the choice you would make. I could hear my father in the background asking what was happening, and my mother covering the phone to whisper urgently to him. Your father wants to talk to you, she said finally. Sarah. His voice was calmer than my mother's, but I could hear the disappointment underneath. Your mother tells me you're planning to defer Harvard to work overseas. Yes. I have to say, I'm concerned about this decision. You've worked so hard to get into Harvard, and deferring for 2 years, well, there's no guarantee they'll hold your spot. They've already confirmed they'll hold it. But sweetheart, 2 years is a long time. You'll be out of practice academically, and you'll be behind your peers who start this fall. Is it really worth derailing your career for this? Derailing my career. As if my career were a train that could only run on tracks they had laid for me. Dad, I'm not derailing anything. I'm choosing a different route. But law school will still be there when I get back, if I decide to go back. Another long silence. Sarah, I think you should come home. Let's sit down as a family and discuss this properly. Maybe there's a compromise we can reach. A compromise. Come home and let them talk me out of the first decision I'd ever made independently. Come home and let them convince me that their plan for my life was better than my own plan for my life. No, Dad, I'm not coming home. Sarah, I love you both. I know you think you're looking out for me, but I need to do this. I need to know who I am when I'm not trying to be who you want me to be. I hung up before either of them could respond. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. I got the required vaccinations, applied for work visas, attended online orientations about IRC protocols and cultural sensitivity. I researched Greek customs and practiced conversational phrases. I read everything I could find about the refugee crisis, about the specific challenges facing asylum seekers in Greece, about the political tensions surrounding immigration policy in Europe. My parents called regularly, alternating between attempts to talk me out of going and resigned acceptance that I was determined to leave. Marcus called once, ostensibly to wish me well, but really to tell me that I was being dramatic and making things harder than they need to be. Ashley sent a cheerful text saying she thought what I was doing was so brave, and she wished she had the courage to do something similar, which somehow felt more condescending than my brother's disapproval. Jessica and David and my other Northwestern friends were universally supportive, though I could tell some of them thought I was having some kind of quarter-life crisis. Professor Williams was thrilled, sending me reading lists and contact information for colleagues working in refugee services. He also mentioned that Harvard had reached out to him, asking if he knew anything about my decision to defer, which confirmed that my parents had probably called the law school directly to try to intervene. 3 days before my departure, my parents drove to Boston. They took me to dinner at an expensive restaurant near Harvard, and I could tell they'd chosen it deliberately, a place where successful people ate, where Harvard professors brought important guests, where the conversation would naturally turn to academic achievement and prestigious careers. We sat at a white-clothed table, surrounded by the quiet murmur of intelligent conversation, and I felt like I was attending my own intervention. "You look thin," my mother said, studying me across the table. "Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Mom." "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" my father asked, cutting straight to the point. "It's not too late to change your mind. Harvard would probably still accommodate you for the fall semester if you called this week. I had been expecting this conversation, had prepared for it, but sitting there between my parents in that restaurant, I felt 22 years of conditioning pulling at me. They loved me in their way. They wanted what they thought was best for me, and they were offering me exactly what I had always been told I should want. Prestige, security, a path that made sense to everyone who mattered. "I'm sure," I said quietly. My mother leaned forward. "Sarah, honey, I know we haven't always been as attentive as we should have been. Your father and I, we get caught up in work and Marcus's projects, and maybe we don't tell you enough how proud we are of everything you've accomplished." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her, and it almost broke my resolve. But throwing away Harvard to work in refugee camps, it's not going to solve whatever you're trying to prove. "I'm not trying to prove anything, Mom. I'm trying to live my life." "But this isn't your life," she insisted. "Your life is law school and a career and building something meaningful. This is just running away." "Maybe it is running away," I admitted. "But maybe sometimes running away is the bravest thing you can do." My father reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Sarah, you're our daughter. We love you. We just don't want to see you make a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. And I don't want to live a life I'll regret for the rest of my life," I replied. "Dad, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for years. I've been successful. I've been accomplished. I've been everything you wanted me to be. But I've never been happy." "Happiness is overrated," my mother said sharply. "Security and achievement matter more than happiness. Maybe to you, but not to me." We finished dinner in relative silence, the conversation turning to safer topics. The weather, the restaurant, Marcus's latest business development. My parents drove me back to my sublet, and we stood awkwardly on the sidewalk saying goodbye. "Call us when you get there," my mother said, hugging me tightly. "And call us regularly. We want to know you're safe." "I will." "And Sarah," my father added, "if you change your mind about any of this, you call us immediately. We'll figure out Harvard. We'll figure out everything. Just call us." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Despite everything, despite the years of feeling invisible, I loved them. They had done their best according to their own understanding of what parenting meant. It wasn't their fault that their best hadn't been what I needed. I watched their car disappear into Boston traffic, and I felt like I was watching my childhood finally end. 2 days later, I was on a plane to Athens. The Moria refugee camp on the Greek island of Lesbos was not what I had expected, though I'm not sure what I had expected. The photographs in news articles and IRC reports had shown overcrowded conditions and makeshift shelters, but they hadn't captured the smell. A mixture of cooking fires, inadequate sanitation, and too many people living too close together. They hadn't captured the sound either, a constant background noise of conversations in Arabic, Farsi, Dari, and a dozen other languages I couldn't identify, punctuated by children playing and crying, and the occasional argument between frustrated adults. I arrived on a Thursday morning in late August, stepping off the ferry from Athens with 2 suitcases and a stomach full of nerves. Elena Papadopoulos, the IRC field coordinator, met me at the port. She was in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of weathered face that suggested years of working outdoors in difficult conditions. "Sarah Chen?" she asked, extending a hand. "Welcome to Mytilene. I hope you're ready to hit the ground running." Elena drove me to the camp in a white SUV marked with IRC logos, explaining the current situation as we navigated the winding roads. Moria had been designed to hold 3,000 people, but currently housed over 8,000. The majority were Syrian families, but there were also Afghans, Iraqis, Somalis, and Eritreans, people fleeing conflicts and persecution from across the Middle East and Africa. "Your primary responsibility will be working with our legal aid program," Elena explained. "Most of the refugees here are waiting for their asylum claims to be processed, which can take months or even years. They need help understanding their rights, preparing their applications, appealing negative decisions. You'll be working closely with Dimitri Kostas, our local legal advisor, and Fatima Al-Hassan, one of our community liaisons." As we approached the camp, I could see the sprawl of white tents and prefabricated containers stretching across a hillside. Clothes hung from lines, strung between shelters, and smoke rose from small cooking fires. Children played football in the dusty paths between tents, and groups of men sat in whatever shade they could find, talking and smoking and waiting, always waiting. "It looks overwhelming," Elena said, noticing my expression. "And it is. But you'll be surprised how quickly you adapt. The people here, they're not victims, they're survivors. They have incredible strength and resilience. Your job is to help them navigate a system that's complex and often unfair, but most of them have already survived much worse than bureaucratic frustration." She parked near a cluster of larger tents that served as the IRC's field office. Inside, I met the rest of the team. 8 aid workers from 6 different countries, all experienced in refugee services. Dimitri was a Greek lawyer in his 50s, who had been working with asylum seekers for over a decade. Fatima was a Syrian refugee herself, granted asylum in Greece 3 years earlier, and now working as a translator and community advocate. "The most important thing to remember," Dimitri told me during my orientation, "is that everyone here has a story. They are not case numbers or statistics. They are people who have lost everything and are trying to rebuild their lives. Some will succeed, some will not, but all of them deserve dignity and respect in the process." My first week was overwhelming. I shadowed Dimitri and Fatima, observing asylum interviews, learning the intricacies of Greek and EU immigration law, and beginning to understand the bureaucratic maze that refugees had to navigate. The legal system was complex even for someone with my background. I couldn't imagine trying to understand it while dealing with trauma, language barriers, and the daily stress of living in the camp. I met Amara on my second Monday. She was 25, from Aleppo, traveling alone with her 4-year-old daughter Layla. Her husband had been killed in a bombing 2 years earlier, and she had made the dangerous journey to Europe, hoping to reach Germany, where her sister lived. She had been in Moria for 8 months, waiting for her asylum claim to be processed. "They keep asking me for documents," she told me through Fatima's translation, holding a folder of papers that represented everything she had left of her former life. "But my house was destroyed. My husband's workplace was destroyed. How can I prove things that no longer exist?" It was a common problem. The asylum system required extensive documentation to prove identity, persecution, and family relationships, but refugees often fled with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. We spent hours helping people reconstruct their stories, gathering witness statements, and working with the Syrian authorities to obtain replacement documents when possible. Layla sat quietly beside her mother during our meeting, coloring in a book that one of the aid workers had given her. She spoke very little, even in Arabic, and Fatima explained that many of the children in the camp had stopped talking after experiencing trauma during their journeys. "She used to sing constantly," Amara said, watching her daughter. "Before the war, before her father died, she sang all day long. Now, she is silent." I found myself thinking about Amara and Layla constantly during my first month. I would lie in my small apartment in Mytilene, a 1-bedroom place the IRC had arranged for their international staff, and wonder what it would be like to lose everything and start over in a place where you didn't speak the language or understand the culture. I had chosen to leave my family and familiar life behind. They had been forced to. The work was harder than anything I had done academically, but it was also more satisfying when we successfully appealed a rejected asylum claim, when we helped a family reunite with relatives in other EU countries, when we secured emergency medical care for someone who needed it. These victories felt real in a way that good grades and academic achievements never had. My parents called weekly, and I could hear the confusion in their voices when I described my work. "It sounds very meaningful," my mother would say, in the tone she might use to describe a charity fundraiser that was worthy but not particularly interesting. "But Sarah, you're not learning anything that will help you in law school. Shouldn't you be reading legal journals or taking practice LSATs or something?" I tried to explain that I was learning more about law, real law, practical law, law that affected real people's lives than I ever had in a classroom. But I could tell she didn't understand. To her, learning meant academic learning. Achievement meant institutional recognition, and success meant following a predetermined path toward conventional goals. Marcus got promoted again, she told me during one of our calls. He's been asked to speak at a conference in Silicon Valley. Ashley thinks they might get engaged soon. Marcus's successes, Ashley's presence in the family, their engagement speculation, these updates felt like reports from another planet. I was living in a place where success meant helping a traumatized family navigate bureaucracy, where engagement meant community commitment, where achievement meant small victories against overwhelming odds. After 3 months in Moria, I was asked to accompany a group of refugees to Athens for their final asylum interviews. It was a routine trip, but it would be my first time back on the mainland since arriving in Greece. Athens was overwhelming after months on Lesbos. The noise, the traffic, the crowds of tourists, everything felt too much too fast. But what struck me most was how normal everything looked. People sat in cafes drinking coffee, students walked to university classes, business people hurried to meetings. Life continued as usual while, just a few hundred kilometers away, thousands of people lived in limbo, waiting for permission to join this normal world. I spent the evening walking through the Plaka, the old quarter of Athens, thinking about the distance between these two realities. I found myself in a small taverna, eating dinner alone and watching Greek families celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, couples on dates, groups of friends catching up over wine and conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. Saw your parents at the fundraiser last night. They said you're doing amazing work overseas. So proud of you. I stared at the message, trying to reconcile it with the conversations I'd been having with my parents. They were proud of me in public, proud enough to mention my work at social events, but concerned and confused in private. It was like they understood that what I was doing was admirable in theory, but couldn't accept that it was the right choice for their daughter specifically. I texted back, "Thanks. How's your first year at the firm?" "Brutal, but good. Working 80-hour weeks, but learning so much. Can't wait to hear all about your adventures when you get back." Adventures. As if what I was doing was an extended vacation, a gap year adventure before returning to real life. I thought about Amara and Layla, still waiting in Moria for their asylum decision. I thought about Dimitri, who had dedicated his career to fighting for people who had no other advocates. I thought about Fatima, who had rebuilt her life after losing everything and now spent her days helping others do the same. This wasn't an adventure. This was my life. For the first time since childhood, I was living a life that felt authentically mine. The next morning, I accompanied 3 families to their asylum interviews at the Greek Asylum Service offices. 2 of the families were approved. They would be granted refugee status and allowed to begin rebuilding their lives in Europe. The 3rd family, from Afghanistan, was rejected, and we would have to begin the appeals process. I watched the approved families receive their documents, watched the relief and joy and disbelief on their faces as they realized they were finally safe, finally legal, finally able to plan for a future instead of just surviving each day. And I watched the rejected family try to process the news that they would have to wait longer, fight harder, prove more convincingly that they deserved protection. On the ferry back to Lesbos, I called my parents. "Sarah, honey, how are you?" my mother asked. "We've been worried. You haven't called in 2 weeks." "I'm good, Mom, really good." "Are you sure? You sound different." I was different. I was more confident, more purposeful, more certain of my choices than I had ever been. I was also tired and sometimes frustrated and occasionally overwhelmed by the scale of the problems I was trying to address. But I was happy in a way I had never been happy following their plan for my life. "I am different," I said. "This work, it's changing me. I'm learning things about myself I never knew. That's wonderful, sweetheart, but you're not losing sight of your long-term goals, are you? Harvard will be expecting you back in a year and a half. Mom, can I ask you something? When you were my age, did you ever want to do something that your parents didn't approve of? There was a long pause. Well, yes, I suppose. I wanted to study art history, but my father insisted I major in something more practical. He was right, of course. I ended up using my business degree much more than I would have used art history. But do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd studied what you wanted to study? Sarah, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that maybe practical isn't always right. Maybe sometimes the thing that looks impractical from the outside is exactly what you need to do to become who you're supposed to be. Another long pause. Sarah, are you thinking about not returning to Harvard? The question hung between us, and I realized that yes, I was thinking about it. Not definitively, not as a final decision, but as a possibility that felt less terrifying and more appealing every day. I don't know, Mom. I honestly don't know. But I'm not ready to make that decision yet. I'm still learning. Learning what? Who I am when I'm not trying to be who you want me to be. Beam. After I hung up, I stood on the ferry deck watching the lights of Lesbos grow brighter as we approached the harbor. In my pocket, I still carried my grandmother's jade necklace, and I touched it now, thinking about her courage in leaving everything familiar to build something new. I was beginning to understand that courage wasn't about making dramatic gestures or burning bridges. It was about making choices that aligned with your own values instead of other people's expectations, even when those choices led to uncertainty. I was also beginning to understand that home wasn't a place you were born into or a family you belonged to by accident. Home was something you created for yourself, with people who saw and valued who you actually were instead of who they wanted you to be. As the ferry docked in Mytilene, I felt like I was coming home to a life I had chosen, a life that was difficult and uncertain and completely my own. 18 months into my assignment, I received 2 phone calls that would change everything. The first came on a Tuesday morning in February. I was in the IRC office, working on an appeal for a rejected asylum claim, when Elena knocked on my door. Sarah, there's a call for you from New York headquarters. Line 2. Maria Santos's voice came through clearly, despite the international connection. Sarah, I hope you're doing well. I'm calling with an opportunity I wanted to discuss with you. I leaned back in my chair, curious. What kind of opportunity? We're expanding our operations in Jordan, and we need someone to lead our new legal advocacy program there. It would mean managing a team of local staff, overseeing multiple refugee camps, and working directly with UNHCR and the Jordanian government on policy initiatives. It's a significant promotion, program manager level, and it would come with substantial responsibility. I felt my pulse quicken. A promotion, program management, policy work. It was exactly the kind of advancement that could lead to a serious career in international humanitarian work. The position would start in 6 months, Maria continued, which means you'd be finishing your current assignment in Greece and transitioning directly to Jordan without returning to the US. I know you had planned to go back to Harvard, but I wanted to offer you this opportunity first. The work you've done in Moria has been exceptional, and frankly, we need someone with your combination of legal background and field experience. After the call ended, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the camp. Children were playing football in the space between tents, and I could see Amara hanging laundry on the line outside her shelter. Her asylum claim had finally been approved 3 months ago, and she and Layla were scheduled to relocate to Germany in April to reunite with Amara's sister. Layla had started singing again, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. Last week, she had sung a song in Arabic for me, translating the words into broken English. My mother is strong like the mountain, my heart is brave like the sea. I had cried right there in the legal aid tent, overwhelmed by the resilience of this small girl who had survived so much. These were the moments that made the work meaningful, watching people rebuild their lives, reclaim their voices, find hope again. The opportunity in Jordan would mean more of this work, on a larger scale, with greater impact. It would also mean not returning to Harvard Law School. The second phone call came that evening, as I was cooking dinner in my small apartment. "Sarah, it's Mom. I have some difficult news." My mother's voice sounded strained, older somehow. "Your father had a heart attack yesterday. He's stable now, but it was serious. He's in the cardiac ICU at Northwestern Memorial." The wooden spoon I'd been using to stir pasta sauce clattered to the floor. "What happened? Is he okay? How serious?" "The doctors say he'll recover, but it's going to take time. He'll need surgery, then rehabilitation." "Sarah, I know you're committed to your work there, but could you consider coming home, just for a few weeks? He keeps asking about you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of guilt and obligation settling on my shoulders like a familiar heavy coat. "Of course, Mom. I'll look into flights tonight." "Thank you, sweetheart. I know this is difficult timing, but family has to come first sometimes." After we hung up, I called Elena to explain the situation. She was immediately understanding, arranging for someone to cover my cases and helping me book emergency leave. By Thursday evening, I was on a plane to Chicago, my life in Greece temporarily suspended. Northwestern Memorial Hospital's cardiac ICU was a world of beeping machines and hushed conversations, and the persistent smell of disinfectant. My father looked smaller in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and IVs, his usually commanding presence diminished by medical equipment and the vulnerability of illness. "Sarah," he said when he saw me, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "You came home." "Of course I came home, Dad." I spent the next week shuttling between the hospital and my childhood home, helping my mother coordinate medical appointments and insurance paperwork. Marcus flew in from San Francisco, where his company had relocated, and for the first time in years, we were all in the same place, dealing with the same crisis. It was strange being back in Winnetka after 18 months away. The house felt smaller, the neighborhood more insular, the concerns of my parents' social circle more trivial than I remembered. My mother's friends asked polite questions about my volunteer work in Greece, clearly not understanding what I actually did or why I had chosen to do it. "It must be so rewarding to help those people," one of them said over coffee in my mother's kitchen. "But Sarah, you're not getting any younger. Don't you think it's time to start building a real career? A real career. As if helping refugees navigate asylum systems wasn't real work. As if managing legal aid programs wasn't a real career. As if the skills I'd developed and the impact I'd made somehow didn't count because they happened outside the conventional framework of American professional success." My father's surgery went well, and by the end of my second week home, he was stable and beginning cardiac rehabilitation. The immediate crisis had passed, but recovery would take months. During one of our conversations in his hospital room, he asked about my work in Greece. "Tell me what you actually do there," he said. "Not the general description, the specifics. What does a typical day look like?" I found myself describing Amara and Layla, the complexity of asylum law, the satisfaction of winning an appeal or helping a family reunite. I told him about the policy briefings I'd started writing, the training programs I'd developed for local staff, the coordination meetings with other NGOs and government officials. He listened quietly, asking thoughtful questions about legal procedures and administrative challenges. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "That sounds like important work, Sarah. Complex work. The kind of work that makes a difference." "It is. But it's not the work we planned for you." "No, it's not." "He reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you. I should have said that before, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the work you're doing and the person you've become." It was the first time he had said he was proud of me without qualification, without comparing my achievements to Marcus's or contextualizing them within their expectations for my future. "Thank you, Dad. That means everything. But I have to ask, What happens next? Do you come back to Chicago permanently? Do you go back to Greece? Do you still plan to attend Harvard? I don't know, I admitted. I've been offered a promotion with IRC, a program manager position in Jordan. It would mean continuing this work long-term, maybe permanently. And Harvard will always be there. But this opportunity might not be. He nodded slowly. Your mother won't like hearing that. I know. But it's your decision to make. That evening, my mother, Marcus, and I had dinner together for the first time in over 2 years. My mother had cooked my favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, the same comfort food she'd made when I was stressed about exams or disappointed about some childhood setback. It's so good to have you home, she said, passing the potatoes. The house feels right with everyone here. Marcus looked up from his phone. How long are you staying? Ashley and I are thinking about visiting next month, and it would be great if we were all here together. I'm not sure yet, I said. It depends on Dad's recovery and my work situation. Work situation? My mother asked sharply. Sarah, you're not thinking about going back there permanently, are you? I had been dreading this conversation, but there was no avoiding it anymore. I've been offered a promotion, program manager for IRC's operations in Jordan. It's a significant opportunity, and it would mean continuing this career path instead of returning to law school. The silence that followed was heavy with everything we'd been avoiding saying for 18 months. Sarah, my mother said finally, you've had your adventure. You've helped people and seen the world and proven whatever you needed to prove to yourself. But now it's time to come home and build a real life. This is a real life, Mom. Working in refugee camps is not a real life. It's charity work. It's something you do before you settle down and start a career and a family. Why can't it be a career? Why does career only count if it happens in Chicago or New York or some other place you consider appropriate? Marcus looked up from his phone, finally engaged in the conversation. Sarah, be realistic. You're 24 years old. You can't spend your entire life working for non-profits in foreign countries. What about retirement? What about buying a house? What about having kids? What about being happy? What about doing work that matters? What about building a life that feels authentic instead of just successful? Happiness is a luxury, my mother said, her voice rising. Security and stability matter more than happiness. You think your father and I have been happy every day for 30 years? Of course not. But we built something solid, something lasting. We provided for our family. We contributed to our community. We lived responsibly. And I'm not living responsibly? You're living like a college student who doesn't want to grow up. You're 24 years old, Sarah. It's time to start acting like an adult. I felt something snap inside me. The same feeling I'd had at my graduation party when I realized I would never be enough for them the way I was. I am acting like an adult. I'm making adult decisions about my adult life. I'm supporting myself. I'm doing meaningful work. I'm building professional expertise in a field I care about. The fact that it doesn't look like your version of adulthood doesn't make it less valid. Sarah, Marcus said, in the tone he'd used since childhood when he thought I was being unreasonable. You're being dramatic. Nobody's saying your work isn't important, but you can do important work here too. You can work for the ACLU or legal aid or something. You don't have to live in refugee camps to make a difference. But I want to live in refugee camps. I want to do this specific work with these specific people in these specific places. Why is that so hard to understand? Because it's not sustainable, my mother said firmly. Because you can't build a life on good intentions and idealism. Because at some point, you're going to want things that this lifestyle can't give you. What things? A husband, children, a house, stability, community. I have community. I have colleagues who respect my work and refugees who depend on my advocacy and local staff who have become like family to me. I have a life that feels meaningful every single day. But for how long? What happens when you're 35 and single and living in some tent in the middle of nowhere with no savings and no retirement plan and no prospects for a normal family life? What if I don't want a normal family life? What if I want the family I've chosen instead of the family I was born into? The words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't take them back. My mother's face went white, and Marcus put down his phone to stare at me. "Sarah," my mother said quietly, "you don't mean that." "I do mean it. I love you, but I don't want your life. I don't want your values or your priorities or your definition of success. I want my own life, based on my own choices. Even if those choices break your family apart. Even if those choices disappoint you." Yes. I left the house that night and checked into a hotel near the hospital. I needed space to think, space to process the conversation and my own feelings about the choice I was facing. The next morning, I called Maria Santos from my hotel room. "Maria, it's Sarah Chen. I want to accept the position in Jordan." "Wonderful. I'm so pleased. When can you start?" "I need to finish up my current assignment in Greece and handle some family matters here in Chicago. Could we say 3 months? June 1st? Perfect. I'll send you the employment contract and details about the position. Sarah, I think you're going to do exceptional work in Jordan. This is exactly the kind of leadership role that could lead to regional director positions down the line." Regional director. Career advancement within international humanitarian work. A path forward that built on the work I'd already done instead of abandoning it for something completely different. After the call, I sat in my hotel room looking out at the Chicago skyline, thinking about the choice I had just made. I was turning down Harvard Law School permanently. I was choosing a career that would likely keep me overseas for years, possibly decades. I was choosing work that mattered to me over work that would matter to my parents. I was choosing myself. That afternoon, I went to the hospital to tell my father about my decision. He listened quietly, asked a few questions about the position and the career prospects, then nodded. "I think you're making the right choice for you," he said finally. "It's not the choice I would make, and it's not the choice your mother wanted you to make. But it's your choice, and that matters more than our approval. Thank you, Dad. Just promise me you'll be safe and stay in touch. Your mother and I, we love you, even when we don't understand you. I promise." I called my mother that evening to tell her about my decision. The conversation was brief and painful. "I'm disappointed, Sarah, deeply disappointed. But you're an adult, and apparently you're determined to make your own mistakes." "They're not mistakes, Mom. They're choices. We'll see." 2 weeks later, I flew back to Greece to finish my assignment. Amara and Layla had already departed for Germany, but Amara had left me a letter written in careful English. "Dear Sarah, thank you for helping my daughter and me find our voices again. You showed us that we deserve dignity and hope. I will never forget your kindness. I hope you find your own home, wherever that may be. Your friend always, Amara." I kept the letter in my wallet, along with my grandmother's jade necklace and a photo from my college graduation, the one where I'm holding my valedictorian medal, smiling at the camera like I knew exactly who I was and where I was going. At the time, I had known exactly who I was supposed to be. Now I was learning who I actually was, and for the first time in my life, those two people were the same person. 3 months later, I boarded a plane to Amman, Jordan, to begin the next chapter of a life I was finally living on my own terms. In my carry-on bag, I had letters of recommendation from colleagues in Greece, a contract for a job that would use every skill I'd developed and challenge me to develop new ones, and a phone with messages from friends around the world who understood why this work mattered. I also had a family who loved me but didn't understand me, who would probably never stop hoping I would change my mind and come home to live the life they had planned for me. But for the first time, I was okay with disappointing them. I was more afraid of disappointing myself. As the plane lifted off from Athens, I touched my grandmother's necklace and thought about courage. Not the dramatic kind that makes good stories, but the quiet kind that helps you choose your own path, even when everyone you love is pointing in a different direction. The kind of courage that helps you finally become who you were always meant to be.